Thanks everyone for being here today in our 2021-2022 Truth and Student Fee Board proposal or Truth and Tuition hearing. We're happy to have those who are here in person and as well as those joining us online or streaming. Just quickly before we go into the presentation, I also want to thank President Cockett for being here, joining us, taking her time and making sure that we as students are aware of what's going on campus. So just kind of the format, both of us will be doing a presentation, President Cockett and I, and then after, everyone will have the opportunity to ask a question. However, we want these questions submitted online through involvement.usu.edu. So if you're here in person, please email that involvement.usu.edu to submit your questions, and also if you're joining us online. So that will kind of be the method through which to ask questions. So my name is Sami Ahmed. I'm the student body president here at USU, and it will be my privilege to talk about the student fee changes that are happening this year, and the tuition part will be presented by President Cockett. So I'll go into my portion of the presentation. So as you know, a lot of you might be aware that we had a lot of changes that occurred with student fees. The overall institution goal was to keep fees flat this year. And so here's kind of the timeline of all the different groups of students that this proposal went through, and you will also see what the consequent steps will be after. So today is our Truth and Tuition on March 3rd, and then after that we'll be able to take these proposals to the Board of Trustees and onto the Board of Higher Education. Prior to that, statewide fee boards met, Logan Fee Board, as well as the USA Executive Council and the Logan Fee Board again to talk about some of the changes that occurred. So the primary changes that you guys see here, on January 27th, the Student Fee Board proposed to increase the ARC fee by $650, and we also had a decrease proposed from the technology fee of $160. I believe a lab went offline in Old Main, so those fees were no longer required. However, with that increase, it kind of came into direct opposition with the overall goal of keeping student fees flat. So we had about a $4.90 to offset in order to have a zero net effect on students. So in order to do that, all other fee receiving areas had to kind of take the hit on that $4.90, except for CAPS and mental health. So every student fee receiving area, it took a small decrease in order to lower that $4.90. Additionally, with student fees, many of you might be aware that there's salaries attached to these student fees that we commit to, for example, athletics fees or activities fee we pay here. There's a salary component to that. So every year those compensations would have to be adjusted in order to meet economic demands. So student fees slowly increase. So in order to kind of minimize that impact and stabilize fees, a lot of the salary compensations will now be transitioned to tuition, and a portion of a large portion of your compensation that is covered through tuition is funded by the state, about 75% of it. So that will now be the case with some of these student fees that have a large portion of it attached to salaries. Additionally, we had a few fees that students were charged, like the Aggie Blue Bikes, Blue Goes Green, and open educational resources that we were able to find additional funding for, and were no longer necessary to be funded through student fees. So those were lowered as well. So in the end, there was no student. In the end, we would have a zero effect on students. So the current student fees are at about 564, and statewide is at 363. So about $105 of that is transitioning to tuition. So right now, with this proposal, the student fees will only be at around $459 and $258 for Logan and statewide. So just a bit of history on student fee increases on the Logan campus, and I believe we have a statewide as well. So you can see almost every year there's always some type of increase on student fees until this year with the proposal that we have. So this will meet the institution's goal of keeping fees flat and not having any additional increase, and it will also help students in stabilizing their fees with moving a portion of it to tuition. So, and statewide has been pretty consistent at keeping it flat, except for 2017 and 2018. So they will also be impacted with with the move to tuition, but the overall effect will still be zero. So these are the proposed changes to student fees. If you have any questions, we'll take them at the end. Okay, now I'll turn the time over to President Cockett to cover the tuition changes.
Well, it's great to be here. You know, last year when we did this, it was pre-COVID. We had pizza. We had learned that by offering food, the attendance was a lot better. We had almost 100 people, a lot of interchange and conversation. So here we are today. So really crazy. We're almost to our 1-year anniversary of when COVID came to Utah State. Anybody remember that when we let you guys out? Did we cancel class from, was it Monday, Tuesday, and then when you came back on Wednesday, suddenly all your classes were supposed to be online? Doesn't that seem like decades ago? So my hope is by next year, we're back to serving pizza at the Truth in Tuition and Fees hearing, and hopefully have a few more people that can attend. But we are glad that we are able to broadcast this to those that did not choose to come, and especially hello to all of our campuses across the state. So Sammy, President Ahmed, charged me to explain the proposed changes to the tuition. Our hope, our fervent hope, had been just like student fees, we would not have to propose an increase in tuition. But as I will show you, the state legislature did not provide full funding for salary compensation, and therefore we do have a proposed increase on tuition. But again, just as with the student fees, we want to make sure that people understand our reasoning behind this proposed increase, and we'd like to have any feedback and ideas you might have on our proposal. So we, a couple of years ago, created a student committee. At that time, it was called second tier tuition. And so we had this committee. Last year, the state eliminated the category of second tier tuition, said no, the student should review all tuition changes. And so on February 11th, Sammy and I met with the Student Tuition Review Committee. We also met with the Executive Council. Today we're in the Truth in Tuition and Fees hearing. And then just as with the fees and what Sammy showed you, We meet with the USU Board of Trustees on Friday, and then we take the proposal to Utah Board of Higher Education on March 25th. So the bad news is that we do need to request an increase in tuition. The state legislature sets each year a level of salary increase. They call it salary compensation increase for all state employees all across Utah. This is police officers, highway patrolmen, people in Division of Environmental Quality, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, the county offices, as well as higher education. But for many years, they've done this one twist. They don't give the full amount of money that they approve as salary increases to the higher education institutions. And instead, they say, get 25% of what we've approved from tuition. Now, Sammy, President of MID, actually served last year as well, and he and other student leaders across the higher ed institutions, the public institutions, have been working on an initiative along with presidents, along with our vice presidents, along with lots and lots of people to say to the state, if you're going to approve this increase and yet you want to hold tuition low, you have to provide the full funding. Don't turn around and say, okay, higher ed, you can charge the students. It looked like that proposal was moving forward with some interest, and then COVID hit. And the state is still concerned about ongoing tax revenues. So they said they really couldn't fund the full salary compensation this year, but they will continue to look at that as an initiative in future years. So again, they approved an overall 3% salary increase. And for USU to get 25% of what that costs, we need almost 1.6 million. That translates into an increase of about 1.6% on our tuition for across our various campuses. The second thing that we were having conversations about, hoping that the legislature would fund those, was USU faculty promotions. Each year, we review between 75 and 85 different faculty files all across the colleges and look to see if they are ready to be promoted. There's only 2 times in a faculty member's career where they seek and may be awarded promotion. It's from assistant to associates after about 6 years, and then from associate to full professor, which can range anywhere from 3 to some people, it takes 25 years to get that promotion, and some faculty never get it. So we make this moment in time noteworthy for that faculty. We do give them a substantial increase. This is the only time, again, that our faculty have a regular slotted advancement and promotion. So I would hate not to be able to fund that for this year's group. We're estimating that about 85 faculty have sought this promotion, and it would cost almost 1.3 million to cover their salary increases. That translates to a tuition increase of 1.28%. The final one, again, that we wish the legislature would fully fund when they sit over here, what is going to happen, is this internal service fees. Again, the legislature says we're going to increase internal service fees across all state agencies, but higher ed, we're only going to give you 75% of that increase. You need to get the rest out of tuition. Not a lot of money, $44,000, a 0.04% tuition increase. But again, we have to continue to talk to our legislature, our representatives in the state, to say, if you want to help us keep tuition low, fully fund these different approvals, right? So again, my hope had been this year to be able to stand up and say, we're not raising student fees and we're not raising tuition. But at least this year, it looks like, unfortunately, we do need to request another year of tuition increases. So this is what it shows, what that amount would be. When you add up those different percentages, it's a 2.9% increase, and I'm showing $98 increase for residents, $314 increase for non-residents. If you do the math here, you'll see that non-resident tuition is by policy and by state legislature has to be at least 3 times what a resident student pays. So again, we don't have a lot of freedom with shifting these in the amounts, and so we did 2.9% across both, even though that's a more substantial increase for non-residents than residents. This, just as President Mids showed for student fees, this is the history of tuition increases. Last year and this year, we have really tried to do the bare basics of the tuition increase. It is true that this university has raised tuition over the years through feedback like you folks, through the Tuition Review Committee, through the USU SA Executive Council. We were hearing different initiatives of how students would like to grow access, grow opportunities in their educational experience here at USU. I did not even ask for suggestions on raising tuition this year because the 3 basic things, salary increases, faculty promotions, and that internal service fee are requiring a 2.9% increase, and I certainly don't want to do more. This is the residential actual dollars, and you can see what Sammy talked about. We moved it was a charge given to us by the state auditor that we needed to start shifting fees, student fees, onto tuition. And so that whole category of salary compensation, we're shifting that from fees over to tuition. So the dollar amount, as I'll show you, looks odd. If you did the math, you'd say, well, that's more than $98. Well, that's because student fees were reduced, shifted over to tuition, and in addition, this $98 increase. So believe you me, this is a confusing concept. And I actually worked on these slides all day yesterday trying to show that in the end of it, we are only increasing the tuition by those 2 numbers I showed you on a previous slide. $98 for a resident and $314 for a non-resident at both the Logan and the statewide campuses. But what gets confusing is if you simply looked at the tuition column and compared it to last year, you would see this really much, much higher increase. But if you looked over at just the fees column, you would see this decrease of $105. But when you put them both together, tuition and fees, the residence has increased by 98, and the non-residence has increased 314. Now, one of the things, too, that I wanted to show you is across the statewide, except for a very specific group of students, whether you're in Logan or one of our other campuses, you are paying the same on tuition. But to make it even more confusing, those students do not pay the same amount in student fees. So last year, Logan students were paying $564 in student fees. The statewide were paying $363 in fees. Okay, we kept all fees flat, but we took $105 out of the student fees, moved it over to tuition, and then the fees went down. So student fees on Logan went from $564 to $459. That increased tuition by $105 plus the $98 net change, and that's then what the final tuition and student fees is for next year per semester. So hopefully that makes sense. I don't think I could have had a more confusing proposal to present to you. But again, I want to assure you, our goal is to try to hold increases to a minimum, no increase in student fees, and the net change is due to those salary compensations and the internal, whatever it's called, that the state is not fully funding. Okay. One of the things that we're always required to show you is where we rank for tuition compared to peer institutions. So down at the bottom, it shows which institutions are considered by the state to be our peers. Notice that is not UVU, that is not Snow, that is not Dixie, that is not U of U. What they are comparing us to are other land-grant universities, such as Colorado State, Kansas State, Montana State, New Mexico State. And when you look at equivalent universities to us, we actually rank 8 of 11. So we're down at the bottom. And the average across all these institutions is 8994. We're at 7659. And I'm sure you said, she forgot to update her slide. It shows 2019 to 20. This is the last data that was posted by the Utah System of Higher Education. But I think in the next couple of days, they'll get last year's data, and I can put that in. But again, holding our tuition and fees to the bare bones increase, I am confident that we will still stay as one of the lower costing institutions compared to other land grants across the country. So I know it's a lot of money. I take that very responsibly, but I still think USU does a lot that we can be very proud of with this tuition and fees amount. Here is what it looks like in non-resident. We're 10th of 11th in these peer institutions for non-resident students. In fact, we found different land grants where it is actually cheaper to come to Utah State, pay non-resident tuition and fees, than to stay in your own state and pay their resident fees. So good price. We love that because it brings in people from around the country that we can have join our student body. All right, now I'm going to confuse you guys further. We actually have 2 other tuition tables here at USU. We have at Eastern, Moab, and Blanding, students who take 65 credits or less pay a lower amount. And the reason is is because they are designated, USU in those regions is considered their local community college. So for those students, they are paying a community college tuition. And rather than saying, if you're taking these degrees, you will pay that amount. If you're taking these degrees, you're paying that amount. We said, if you're taking 65 credits or less, you'll pay the community college amount. If you've taken more than 65 credits, now you'll go on that Logan statewide tuition table. So again, a little confusing. These people, again, will pay a 2.9% increase in their tuition. They will have $105 moved out of their student fees over onto tuition, just the same. But 2.9 of a lower amount of money is a less net change amount. And here's what the history there is. These folks have actually had a little more significant tuition increase over the years than the Logan students. However, this year we came up with ways that they would pay that same 2.9% increase. Again, their tuition was increased for residents and non-residents by that 2.9%, moved out the fees, et cetera, which makes it a little more confusing. Here is the table then to compare last year's tuition to this year's tuition, last year's fees to this year's fees, and then the tuition and fees net change. Again, just as with Logan and statewide, tuition went up more than 2.9 because we moved student fees over there. Student fees went down because we moved some out and we had no student fee increases. So the net change is shown there, $53 or $158, which is 2.9% of just the tuition column. Well, now to confuse you guys even further, we have a third tuition table. Not only are we considered the community college in southeastern Utah, we actually are considered the tech ed college for eastern Moab and Blanding. This is equivalent to Bridgerland or Davis Tech College or Mountainland, et cetera. And they have a very interesting tuition calculation. There is no plateau. You can't take more hours beyond 12 and pay only 12 credits. They pay per credit and it just adds up. Their amount is $82.50 for residents or non-residents. And it's simply that value multiplied by the number of credits. A lot of these students take 12 to 15 credits worth each semester. Definitely their tuition and fees is lower. If for those of you not familiar with tech ed, these are programs like cosmetology, auto mechanics, welding, nursing, et cetera, et cetera. So a different type of program, different type of tuition table. Now, here's what's really interesting. The state paid their full salary compensation. So we did not have to raise the tuition on these folks by 2.9%. That is an historical thing that the state has always done for the tech colleges, where they have turned to the academic side and said, you have to get 25% and your promotions out of what you charge your student. So these students did not have a tuition increase, and because we held all student fees flat, they did not have a student fee increase either. But we messed up. Last year, we were creating this tech ed tuition model, and they have program fees that are charged. Now, if you think about it, some of these programs have a lot of expense, like welding. Some programs that are in this tech ed don't, like bookkeeping. So they charge amounts of dollars, not as course fees, but as an overall program fee. And you pay that to cover all of your expendables. So we did about 15 to 20 of these last year, got them approved, these program fees. And here's I'm admitting a mistake. We forgot these 4 programs. So last year, the students that were in these 4 programs had 0%, $0 for the program fees. Unfortunately, that did not cover their consumables. And so we had to get those program fees calculated, and we are requesting approval for those in the coming year. And you can see there. And I think, it kind of shows, automated manufacturing would not have as many supplies, consumables as a pharmacy technician. So it's not based strictly on hours. It's more the amount of consumables you use in that whole program. So hopefully that makes sense. If nothing else, I hope this shows you the breadth of opportunities that you can have at USU, particularly in the southeast corner of Utah. You can do tech ed, you can do community college programs, you can do your full 4-year, you can do graduate programs, et cetera, and then here at Logan, all of those except the tech ed. So that is, I do believe, my last slide. So I'll turn the time over to Sammy, and he'll answer all the questions.
All right. Thank you, President. As you can see, tuition it's not simple and it's very complicated. So I want to thank President Cockett as well as VP Cowley for going through all these numbers and putting these presentations together. So just as a reminder, if you want to ask any questions, you can address them to me or President Cockett, and we'll be able to field them. So if you go to involvement.usu, you can ask these questions at involvement.usu.edu. So,
Sammy?
Yeah.
It's involvement@usu.edu.
Involvement@usu.edu. So, thank you. While the questions are being prepped, I actually got one that was texted to me, and it's from a graduate student named Jessica. And the question was, will graduate programs see these increases? And yeah, so the 2.9% increase will apply to graduate students, as well as the shifting of that 105 to student fees. So both of those things apply to graduate students as well. So. Dexton will be asking the questions and let us know who it's addressed to.
Sammy, you said that you were removing fees from the blue bikes and other programs, and that you had found funds for those programs elsewhere. Where did you find that extra funding from?
Yeah, so if that whole process with fees, there's a lot of details to it, but a simple example with the Aggie Blue Bikes, for example, so $1.11 of that fee is actually connected to salary. So with the move to tuition, that will be covered through tuition. So that left about $1.67 that we needed to find compensation for. So after talking to the people who are over that fee, a large portion of it will be covered through a surcharge on parking. The whole purpose of having bikes and making those types of resources available was of sustainability measures. So we thought that might be an appropriate way to find those sources. And in truth, if you saw the $4.90 increase on fees, a portion they had to take a small hit as well. So they are getting a small reduction, but the majority of their fees are covered. So same applies with the other ones, with the technology and Blue Ghost Green. They're just other funds and other resources that we were able to find and that can offset that.
Okay. Despite students wanting to take a majority of their classes in person, a lot of classes this year were only offered online. And there was a student fee called online class fee. And this individual would like to know, why were those fees present?
I caught that except the very last part.
This individual would like to know why there was a charge on, why there was a student fee called online class fees.
Right. So in a traditional semester, there are added, I mean, people say, oh, online classes must be cheaper, right? I guess because you don't turn the lights on and you don't heat the room. Actually, online courses are more expensive. They require a lot of software and technology, IT technology, to deliver. So historically, I think it's been maybe 4 or 5 years, there was a calculation of how much an online class costs over a face-to-face class. So again, there's the same instructor costs, there's the same course development costs, et cetera, but to account for that software, hardware increase, that course fee, that online course fee has been charged. Now, in fall, we suspended that, I think. Dave, can you give me a heads up? Yeah, did we still do it in spring? We charged? Okay. So, yes, there is that cost. Again, I can't tell you the number of people that say, it must be cheaper to do online. It is not. Per credit, it actually costs more because of these additional resources you put into the course.
This is a question for both of you. A recent audit by the Utah State Auditor's Office discovered that the state of Utah spends almost $88 million to subsidize NCAA athletics across the state institutions. The Auditor's Office summarized by saying the following in the report, quote, "With the many concerns regarding the cost of college, we recommend students, stakeholders, and policymakers review this information and consider the impact these subsidies have on college affordability and the college experience," close quote. Utah State University subsidizes almost 60% of NCAA athletics at the institution, which percentage is the second lowest in the state only to the University of Utah, which can be appreciated. But full-time students are subsidizing almost $1,084.18 per student, which is third highest in the state, with a moderate continuing increase trend over the last 9. What is the Utah system of higher education and Utah State University and USUSA specifically doing to stop the continual increasing burden on students, through tuition and student fees to subsidize athletic programs, and instead put the burden for revenue on the programs themselves and those interested in attending and supporting them?
Yeah, I'll briefly touch on that, and President, if you want to add. So as far as what is the university doing, one thing we talked about with the fees, with athletics, that's one of the fees that a lot of students have a heartburn over. So one thing that we have done this year with the transition over to tuition, athletics will no longer have that salary portion that is attached to it. So students can expect for that fee to be stable. And in addition, I know, I've served as student body president for 2 years now, and a lot of students look at athletics and freak out and go, why is it there? Why don't the programs generate, or why are they supported and subsidized? Yes, that is true, but at the same time, those programs are our primary method of recruiting. When we go play Illinois, an ad gets played because of our football games and things like that. So it's more of a symbiotic relationship than a parasitic relationship that a lot of students look at the number and freak out, but that's not the case. So as far as what we have done, we've tried to keep that stable. So hopefully over the next few years that you can see that if athletics is 114, it remains 114. So President, if you want.
With due respect to our state auditor, the state auditor only referred to student fees. And yes, our athletic fee as part of dollars was high, but that's because we had a lot of salaries, the advisors, even some coaches, et cetera, on that student fee. We've switched those off to tuition. So as Sammy says, there's no reason now to increase that fee beyond 114 unless you folks decide you want to give more. Probably the best comparison, just like I said, you can't compare us to UVU or Dixie or Snow when you look at how much we invest in NCAA sports. If you look at the U, people that are astute will say, well, the U is only charging student fees of $83 for their athletics. USU's doing $114. Well, one of the biggies is the students also have to pay to go to their athletic events at the U. We do it as a free thing. The second part, though, that the state auditor missed was how much total dollars is in athletics. At USU, the athletics budget is about $35 million, okay? And it comes from media contracts, it comes from promotions, it comes from donors, it comes from tournament, payments, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So while the student fees are providing dollars, I think it'll be 3.5% or 3.5 million. That is actually a very small amount of the total budget. And, it's one of those things. If we want a coach like Craig Smith leading our men's basketball team, it's going to cost us. So as a president, I know that some people say that should never be a cost that a university should do. Over here to alumni saying that is exactly a way to bring prominence, attention, and as President Ahmed said, potential recruitment across the nation. So when it was $353, I was a little uncomfortable with it. But I think $114 is the right student fee when that allows students to attend all of these different sports, not just men's basketball, not just football, but gymnastics and golf and soccer and et cetera, for free. And we actually have had some people say, why are we paying for counseling and psychology? I don't use CAPS. Why don't they pay the full cost? So you have to remember that there's different perspectives on all of these student fees. But I do think we're now at the right price for athletics as a student fee.
Concluded our questions.
Oh,
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you everyone for attending today and showing your support for the institution and also representing students here and also the administrators that have taken part in this. Do you have any last comments, President?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks all for coming, and hopefully next year we'll have pizza.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.